My name is Don Bockelman. I was trained by the U.S. Army as a launch area technician, electronics technician. I worked on Nike Hercules batteries for 2¼ years in Europe in the late 60s. I was also trained as a systems analyst to analyze and to troubleshoot and fix any problems that would occur in the launch area. Also worked in IFC, which is integrated fire control, on that site for about 7 months while I was on site. I worked for Honeywell here in Seattle for 2 years, making nuclear tip torpedoes, smart torpedoes. They're technicians and operators dealing with really high speed, very mobile targets, because what they're looking at in the IFC are basically electronic representations of what the radar is tracking. So I heard a number of those from young operators and older operators also. And they were stationed at different places around the world. Integrated fire control is where the radars were stationed in relation to the missiles. And it's a whole bunch of radars. There's high power, there's low power target tracking, missile tracking. And they would recount stories where vehicles would come into the high power, and they would track them and pass them off, and they would be going, say, 700 miles an hour and accelerate 3,500 miles an hour in the atmosphere. Quite rapidly. I mean, it was off scale in terms of what technology for our or potential targets, Russian targets were. It was off scale. They are trained to determine the difference between radar strikes and any atmospheric disturbances that can approximate targets. They're experts at it. So when they were tracking targets, they were tracking actual physical objects in the atmosphere. They were 100% convinced that there were physical targets that were in the atmosphere and were involved in a variety of different types of travel. That was in the late 60s that I was hearing the reports. The reports went back into the 50s because a lot of the older operators had been on Ajax sites, Nike Ajax sites, and they were tracking them, and primarily the reports that I got were from the United States. They were in the United States. The military official position is completely opposite of what people who operate very sophisticated radar systems routinely perceive. If there was a large event, they would give you specific orders to not disclose to anybody ever. And one evening I was sitting in my living room, and it was in October of 1978, and I had all the lights off, and I was just sitting there just letting my mind wander, and quite abruptly, all of a sudden, 4 amber lights started shining in the room and filling it with diffuse amber light. And needless to say, I turned around quite rapidly to determine what it was that I was seeing. And there were 3 lights that were approximately equidistant from each other, and a 4th one off of the equidistant spacing a little bit, but in the same plane. Anyway, after I saw this object, this jet came from the west, due west, and I'm very well oriented, while I was standing on the back porch of my house, and attacked and fired a missile, an air defense missile. As it turned out, it was a high explosive missile right at the target. And one of the things that I was doing outside of observing it is trying to ascertain approximately how far it was away from me. Well, as soon as the jet launched the missile, because my experience in air defense, and I know that we have air-to-air missiles that have nuclear warheads, I ducked behind my back porch so that I wouldn't get blasted with the alpha and beta particles, because they blind you and they burn you horribly. And I ducked behind it, waited for a period of time. There was no nuclear explosion, so I went so I could view the object again. Shrapnel was falling to the ground. It had exploded, and the object was accelerating away at a mind-boggling speed away from where the transaction occurred. This event occurred, the actual attack on the craft occurred about 10 miles east of Cedar Woolley. I'd say about 3 miles north of the area called Lyman-Hamilton. It's on the Skagit River in northwest Washington state. Outside of the speed, the thing that was most impressive about these targets is their capacity to have abrupt turns. People who are in air defense, look at mass and turning radius. Well, we had nothing that was capable of matching their capacity for minuscule turning radiuses. I mean, we're talking about virtually no radius turns at high speeds, 2,000 miles an hour, right angle turn. Just pew. Not only turns, but descents and ascents, where they would descend rapidly. It didn't seem to make any difference to them where, in which direction they went. At 11:14 in '98, November 14th, '98, I was sitting in my front room again. Only this time I was watching a movie. Lights were off in my house. My estimates were it was approximately a mile across, 1,100 feet thick, moving approximately 600 miles an hour without sound. I did get a very, very clear view of its shape because that evening was a light frost. It was clear, the moon was out, could see its shape very well. There were hundreds of lights on it.
What shape was it?
It was roughly triangular shape, a little bit of a truncated triangular shape, because at the back side, it wasn't perfectly. It was like a triangle. It's kind of cut off, and I could see the sides of it. There were rows of lights going up the sides. There were rows of lights going around the perimeter. There were rows of lights going across the bottom. I called my kids that lived in Cedar Woolley, in town, after I saw a number of silent jets come from the south in single file at 4-minute intervals and fly through the flight path. The jets were so quiet you almost can't hear them on tapes. I'd never seen the model of jets, and I'm pretty good at identifying, just particularly military jets. They normally, when they're flying in our area, they fly from west to east on the Cultus Ridge, which is where they were supposed to fly. These flew from directly from south to north. When they moved through the flight path of the object, after they moved through it, they would take an immediate, really hard left and head westward. Then they went on a dog leg, and when they got over Cedar Woolley, and headed north. So I don't know where they were going. The second jet I filmed, when he was flying through the flight path of the object, turned on a bright light. I can only imagine what the purpose of it was, but 4 different jets came at 4-minute intervals, all in exact flight, same pattern, same exact flight pattern.
My name is Michael W. Smith. I was in the Air Force from 1969 to 1973. I was aircraft control and early warning operator, which was basically an aircraft control person, you know, like with airlines and stuff like that. But our job was for the military aircraft side, was to track and give altitudes for military aircraft or their flights, also to detect and identify any incoming aircraft coming into our airspace. In spring of 1970, while I was stationed in Klamath Falls, Oregon, I came up to the radar site on the evening shift, and where there's normally 2 or 3 people in the radar room, there was quite a few, from the cooks to maintenance, all kinds of people, and I asked what was going on, and they said that they was watching a UFO, and I immediately was stunned and asked if the Pentagon was notified. Somebody called the president, and they said no, they don't do that. And I said, well, we should call the news media, or you know, call somebody. This is earth-shaking news, and to me. And he said, no, just calm down. NORAD knows about it. They called NORAD, and that's when the senior NCO pulled me to the side and said that NORAD knows about it. That's the only people we notify. We don't talk about this. We don't tell anybody about this. The people that know, and we just watch, see what happens, and that's it. That's our job. And I insisted, well, there has to be a report filed or something filed, you know. And he said, well, that there is a report that you can file. It's about 1 inch thick. And the first 2 pages is about the sighting. The rest of it is basically a psychological profile of you, your family, you know, your bloodlines, and everything. So when the Air Force goes through it, they can discredit you completely by either saying that, you know, you was on drugs, or your mother was a communist, or anything to discredit you, and you'd never get a promotion. And I'd spend the next 3.5 years up at the North Pole, was living in a tent checking the weather balloons. You know, no hope of promotion. So the message was pretty loud and clear. You just shut up and don't say anything to anybody. It was stationary, wasn't moving at all, and it would slowly lower itself down. It would until it got behind a mountain, so that you lost radar contact. It would stay down for about 15 minutes, and the next thing you knew, it was right back up there. It was up, you know, 80, 90,000 feet. And then the next sweep of the radar scope, it would be, you know, like 200 miles away, stationary, completely stopped. And it would hover there for 5-10 minutes, and then slowly start descending until it dropped off radar. Then it would come back up, and it did this like 3 times that I seen. I heard that it's not an infrequent occurrence out there. They happen quite often, but I seen it actually twice. The object that we seen, it was stationary, and then the next sweep of the scope, which the radar has 6 sweeps a minute, 6 sweeps a minute, would, you know, one sweep it would be here, next sweep it would be 200 miles away, completely stopped. And there's no aircraft that can accelerate and decelerate that fast without having the pilot's face through the windshield. You know, I mean, it's impossible for gravity to operate that way. So it was obviously something we didn't have. We never scrambled interceptors on them, so it's obviously something the Russians never had. It was a UFO. That's the only explanation there was for it. Sorry. And the fact that, you know, NORAD, that we called NORAD, they knew about it, or they would call us to tell us. NORAD knew about it, and like I said, they just handle it like it's just UFO. Just, you know, just watch it and see what happens, but don't take any actions. Don't tell anybody. Don't write it down. Don't disclose it. NORAD is North American Air Defense Command. They're in charge of all the airspace of the United States of North America. And it's their job to identify any incoming aircraft, any threats, any, you know, Russian planes, or any aircraft at all. And so the first thing they do is that any blip that comes in that they don't know what it is, they check it with the flight plans of airlines or private carriers or whatever. And so everything is identified. So when something like this just pops up on the scope with no flight plan and doing erratic behaviors, it's their job to identify it. They have a tie-in with all the radar stations in North America. It all goes to Cheyenne Mountain, and so they have like a big screen, and they can see any area of the country at any time. And so that's how they know. Like, for instance, this other experience was on third shift. I was on the radar, and NORAD called me and informed me that there was a UFO coming up the California coast and it'd be in my area pretty soon. So I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, nothing, just watch it. Don't write it down, you know, because we have a logbook that we're supposed to keep track of anything out of the ordinary, you know, as far as maintenance and things like that. All of it's in a logbook. And they said, don't log it or anything, just watch it. We're just letting you know, heads up. So NORAD was well aware, obviously, that they were around. And the action of the people, when I first my first experience seeing the radar with the UFO on it, the action of the people there was like, you know, it doesn't happen every day, but, you know, it happens quite often. And that was my impression, and because of the way just everybody was, oh, it's just a UFO. It was just so calm, you know, and I'm all frantic and stuff, but apparently the first time you see a UFO on radar, you know, you realize, you know, well, the government knows about this. Why aren't they telling the press? Why aren't, you know, well, I don't know. The radar, they would be on radar because it's very mountainous out there until it got to a point where the radar, where it went behind a mountain. Then obviously it would disappear off the radar. And I don't know if it actually landed or not, but it was off the radar for a good 15, 20 minutes before all of a sudden, boom, it's back up here 90,000 feet instantly. It was explained that, yes, they're UFOs, yes, we know them, yes, NORAD knows about them, but that's it. This is a secret. They're not supposed to talk about it. Don't tell anybody about it. Don't make any reports. Don't write it down. Just shut up and you'll get your next stripe and you can be promoted and we'll go on from there. My second encounter was while I was stationed in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. It was in 1972. I believe it was in the fall of 1972. I was working alone that night. By then I was promoted to a sergeant. I was working alone that night when I got a phone call from the switchboard operator. He said he had the state police on the phone and wanted to talk to me. And I'm thinking, you know, I had a parking ticket overdue or something, but he was real frantic when he got on the phone and said that there's 3 UFOs over the north tower of the Mackinac Bridge. The Mackinac Bridge connects the upper peninsula and the lower peninsula of Michigan. So I immediately, you know, turned on the radar, and but my immediate response was, there's nothing on radar, and I hung up the phone. That's just something that's programmed into you. That's what you're supposed to say. There's nothing on radar, even if you see something. The north tower seemed to be a little bit bigger, and then I realized that they were the UFOs, and one took off, left the other 2, and circled Mackinac Island, and came back to the other 3. Then all 3 started going, following Interstate 75 north from St. Ignace. In the meantime, I got calls from the sheriff department. They were frantic, saying, you know, we're chasing these UFOs up the highway, and my response was, there's nothing on radar. Several people called, several civilians. I believe there was a newspaper person called. And in the meantime, I called NORAD and told them, and they looked it up, and they said, oh, it's coming up, they're going up I-75. I said, yes, at about 70, 80 miles an hour. Now, about halfway between St. Ignace and Sault Ste. Marie, there's Kinslow Air Force Base, which is a SAC base, which they have B-52 bombers. They had 2, apparently, that were on final approach, and that crosses I-75. And so, apparently, they diverted those 2 bombers because they didn't want, you know, if they have nuclear weapons or not, but they didn't want to take a chance on them meeting UFOs about the same altitude crossing the highway. So they diverted the 2 B-52s. As the UFOs came closer, I realized if they keep going this way, following the highway, they go right by the radar site, which is up on top of like a hill, right at Sault Ste. Marie. Bright bluish glow, followed by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars that were chasing it. So I realized, well, I'm not going to be able to see it, so I went back in, looked at the scope, they were gone. Went back outside, couldn't see anything, went back to scope, nothing. When they asked if I had it on radar, I told them no. It's more of a programmed response, thinking back to Klamath Falls, where you're told you don't talk about it, you don't write it down, you don't discuss it. I was afraid if I said, oh yes, I have them on radar, that the next thing I know, newspapers are going to be up there wanting to talk to me and stuff, and I'd probably get court-martialed, or I don't know what would happen. It was just instinct saying there's nothing on radar. When there actually was, I was watching them come up the highway. They were so close together, it looked like one return. In other words, it looked like it was one aircraft, but it was very low. The only thing I did was in the logbook, I wrote this down, wrote the information down, and I told my the senior NCO the next day about it. But that's all you're supposed to do. Don't tell anybody else, don't write it down, although I did write it down. But I doubt if you ever find that book, that logbook. When I seen this blue glow come by, it was probably 100 yards away where the highway is. It was bright, but not super bright. But it was totally silent. The only sound I could hear was the sirens from the police cars that were about 100 yards behind it. And I could see the strobing light of their flashers, of their beacons. They cover it up. They don't want anybody to talk about it. You know, and this is such remarkable technology. These people come from who knows where, that I would think you'd want everybody to know. On a personal note, after this happened in Oregon, and I came home on leave and told my dad about it. He was red, white, and blue through and through, World War II hero and all this, and very patriotic. And I was explaining to him about these UFOs that we've routinely seen out there. And he said, no, he says, the government says there are no UFOs. And I'm saying, Dad, I've seen these, on radar with my own eyes. And so he was torn. The government would never lie to him. Here's his son. I've never lied to him. So he just didn't know what to do. And it wasn't until years later, till after Watergate, that he said, hey, sit down and tell me about this. The government's lying to me, about a little thing like that. Obviously, they're out lying about something big. It's a government cover-up that doesn't need to be here anymore. There's no more Cold War. I believe the same thing Dr. Greer does, that the technology they have, we're burning our fossil fuels up faster than, the ozone and everything. And these people have technologies, they have, it's hard, what do they have? They must have something. And the government knows about it. They have these, if they have these aliens, they have these spacecraft, they have this technology, all this. There's a lot of back-engineered technology that's pretty obvious. What else have they got? Who are they to cover this up? When other governments are coming forward and admitting and showing their files, why isn't our government? While I was in the Air Force, there was a number of people that had witnessed UFOs on radar also. A number of pilots I've talked to had chased them or come close to them, or fly in formation with them. When they come down to land, a friend of mine was in a tower, and there was a flight of 3 coming in of interceptors. And he said, no, there's 4 of you. And the captain was going, no, there's 3 of us. And he said, well, look around. Sure enough, there was a UFO flying in formation with them. When Dr. Greer brought us down to Washington, D.C. for the briefing, I was very nervous. I didn't know what to expect. However, there was about 12 other people there that really amazed me. My story is very tame compared to what they've experienced, what they've encountered. And it was a real eye-opener, how deep the secrecy goes, how deep the cover-up is. everyone from astronauts to, you know, senators and stuff that know that there's something going on.
Okay, my name is Enrique Jaime Colbeck. I am air traffic controller. I work on Mexico Airport, International Airport, named Benito Juarez. I'm a controller since 25 years ago on the Mexico Control Center. Have sightings with a lot of aircrafts and this kind of phenomenon. They don't have an especially way to appear, just appears suddenly and frequently crossing tracks of the flights, the flight of the exposures on our screen, and sometimes goes with them closer, and the pilots scare us sometimes, nervous first and then scare, give us information about it. Who is that kind of object flying with us? Or require traffic information in case that this phenomenon pass and happen very quickly in front of them. Because we don't have any kind of control about it, this kind of phenomenon, of course, and the pilots definitely feels in some way, ¿cómo se dice inseguros? Insecure, yes, about the control that it has around of the aircraft. Flying saucers. In the past, to hear that in the past results very funny. Today is very serious for us, especially after the incident that we have with Aeromexico Fly 109, I think. Well, but 4 years ago, more or less, we have an incident very dangerous with an unidentified object flying in a static fly over the World Trade Center building. It's a very important building for city. It's located in the final track of the runway the final of the runway is 5 on the Mexico airport. So this fly, we have working with them and coming from Guadalajara to Mexico, and I passed the control of this aircraft to the other controller in a point named Paz de G. That point is the beginning of the one of the arrivals that we have there for runways 5 precisely, and we saw in the screen two objects, two echoes very close of the aircraft in that moment, but very suddenly and quickly, and disappear immediately. We have radar contact apparently more or less 30 seconds, no more. And the aircraft, it doesn't report nothing about it. I mean, the pilot doesn't report nothing. Then we knew about that this aircraft in the final approach track, in the final turn, has some kind of trash or was hitting, how do you say, golpeado? Hitting in his principal landing gear and the right side, I think, I'm not sure, for this kind of situation, this kind of objects. It's important that you know that we received information 2 hours ago, more or less, by different ways, and information about that people that was watching that phenomenon flying static over the building, then authorities that was answering about that what kind of aircraft is flying there. Of course, nobody knows nothing about it, knew nothing about it, and then we knew something about that the hitting of this object, and was very dangerous for us, for the responsibility that represents, but because we need to know everything that be flying in our airspace. We have the pilot's reports and sightings at the same time in the radar.
You do?
Yes, we had reports, a lot of reports about the objects flying in the very close to the final track, about 5 or 4 miles on final of the runway 05. It's very curious that we have information about of that point precisely. In that week we had about 7 reports of pilots at different times to have traffic inside, unknown traffic, of course. And it's important that you know that appears in our that things appear in our screen just like an point in a digital way, and they move definitely very fast. The human aircrafts, I mean, talking about now Boeing 727, Boeing 757, moves in a different way, and of course his speed is completely different. It's very reduced in that condition, and when you have the view of the airspace and this screen, the distance between that kind of moments represents around 20 or 30 miles in a second. That is very rare, and of course nothing compared with the human aircrafts, and they turns almost 90 degrees in a second or in a half second. March 4, 1992, we detected 15 objects west side of the Toluca airport, that is very close of our international airport at 50 miles more or less. Then July 28 of 1994, we have almost a collision or something that we can name in that way with a domestic flight of Aeromexico 129, commanded by the pilot Raimundo Cervantes Ruano. We have a lot of sightings reported by the pilots that give us information about the weird traffic or something, brighting lights, and different times. He said sometimes we have a brighting light, very brighting, in front of us, flying opposite, or is static in a static flight, and we have the same detection there. So this kind of phenomenon appears sometimes 12 times a day, 12 times at the month or at the week, and you don't have information about these objects 3 or 4 months, and then appear suddenly and frequently. The Aeromexico Fly 904 has another almost collision that was reported for the pilot Corso, the Capitan Corso, at 11:30 in the morning, and we detect that object on a radar suddenly, just for a moment. Turning in this way, or 90 degrees turn, or descend immediately in a diagonal way to very close to the mountains. No, that is very different, completely different. And completely different, of course, of the military aircrafts also. This phenomenon, of course, doesn't count with a flight plan. Nobody knows nothing about them. Appears when they want to appear. It is very dangerous sometimes. The pilots turns to be hungry or scared and require immediately information. What is that? And we have information. What was the aircraft doing? Many things. A lot of pilots in reports when immediately to have a sighting, to have problems with his instruments of flight, precisely the electronic instruments. September 15 of 1994, we have a detection about 5 hours, more or less, on a radar and a new equipment that we believe that that equipment was working in not a good way, because it's not human that you have detection by 5 hours of the same object and apparently without movement. Well, we concur with the technical persons of radar in our country that the radar system was working well. Around 5 miles, 2 miles in some cases. It's very close for an aircraft and dangerous because the pilot doesn't know nothing about that what is going to do the other pilot. Well, in this case, no. And a Mexican pilot has had a terrified experience with 3 objects that they flying around there, around them, and 2 of these objects flying on top of the wings of the aircraft, and the other fly in front of them in the cockpit cabin, then goes down and he can, ¿cómo se dice golpear? Hit in the aircraft, the small aircraft. We have, or until I know, the radar registered that information, have registered about that information, and had the information about the objects in another place, then close to the aircraft, then only one object, and in that moment precisely the pilot reports that he can't control where all the aircraft, the movement. I mean, apparently these objects is taking him to somewhere, I don't know. But apparently, fortunately for us, or for them, they live in his aircraft and the pilot very close to the volcanoes, precisely. And we have 2 volcanoes, one live volcano, and it's very dangerous. It's very close to our city. Well, a lot of sightings was reported precisely around of the volcano. Some pilots have been sighting when these objects of flying saucers flying or going down in the volcano, inside of the volcano. Then at the north of the airport, and north of the city, and between 2 points, one named Pachuca and the other is San Mateo. The others, and the most dangerous, was reported at 5 miles in the final course of the runway. That is over the city, where we are around 140 controllers on the Mexico Center, and I think that 50 at least we have been information about objects and a screen and a visual contact with them. We have a very funny visual contact. We have 2 Mexican aircrafts flying bound to coming from the north to the airport, flying to land. when one of them reports to have inside a small object of red color flying faster and passing beside him very fast. And the aircraft that was flying behind of the first reports to have another more inside. When that happened, we count with 1 minute to having inside, and a lot of people run to the windows to see that, to try at least to watch this phenomenon, and they have visual contact with these three different objects, different color. Was red, and the other two white, I think, but very so brilliant. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, and around 32 controllers have the same sighting, the same phenomenon inside. Our radar, and at the same time, like in other radars in the world, doesn't detect light. Only objects, solid objects flying. That is very important. Perhaps be the Sara Cuevas case. This lady had a sighting with his camera at the same time that we have a detection on a radar screen 40 miles from that point at the same time. And we receive information for different sources, yes, about that sighting. That's happened on Metepec. And after that, we have a very busy week with sightings each day for a week. And then we have the trouble with the Aeromexico Flight 109 that had a crash with an unknown object in the World Trade Center. And when you have information about pilots, controllers, or people walking in the street at the same time of the same object, at the same moment, definitely you are talking about a sighting, very real. November 24, 1994, we have on service officially our new radar system, and after that moment we have information very exactly about of these sightings at the same time with the pilots and detections. That's why I'm here, because we consider in my country that this is very dangerous. The important thing for me and for the professional guys like me is that they represent a traffic and control traffic and very dangerous traffic for our aircrafts and any places of the world. That is very important for us, and results to be just a traffic, unknown traffic, but at least traffic. We have registered information about 12 or 15 echoes at the same time, and that is very dangerous. Yes, very close to the town, and to the airport also, in a dangerous way, because we have a lot of airbornes and landings, and a lot of traffic crossing our area. That is very dangerous, and a visual way and instrument way is the same. In his film, has around of 50 small objects. Well, it is very important. If our radar it doesn't have detection after 40,000, these objects was filmed very close to the airport. That's at 3.5 miles, because we have checking that. And the people has visual contact with these kind of objects. Can you imagine the size of these objects? And like our civil aircrafts, we have two or, well, for example, on a Boeing 727, we have 150 souls flying. Well, taking in account this kind of similar condition and the size of these objects, well, you have 1,000 of people there, no? We have a lot of more cases, but I don't want to use more time in this. The pilots reports the size of these objects around 100 meters or greater. This is important. I remember on reports of Mexican aircraft flying from Veracruz to Mexico. To have inside an object over the el volcano named Pico de Orizaba. Another pilot flying behind, around 40 miles behind of the aircraft, the first aircraft, has the same object inside, and they are talking about that. It was enormous. They don't say, but well, if you have two aircrafts watching the same phenomenon, and between 40 miles between the aircrafts, the object was enormous. It's very important that the people on the world knows these events and consider that could be very dangerous for aeronautical situation, especially in my country. I don't know why in my country that's occur frequently, but the point is that happens. But our Mexican authorities had a lot of information about the pilots and controllers reports of UFOs in our country. We are, in Mexico, we are 4 control centers and 52 airports. And in the 4 control centers, we have been taking information about this kind of phenomenon, of course, in the 4 centers. Monterrey, yes, in the 4. In Monterrey, on Mérida, and Mazatlan. In Mazatlan, we have an information about that around 15 years ago, and 2 commercial flights and another private aircraft, but an executive aircraft, flying in Mazatlan airspace, very close for with the border with the United States, the border. Information about of 4 or 5 objects flying around there, and they turns to be scared some way, and they decide finally to land on Mazatlan. They don't consider safety the airspace in that moment, and I'm sure about, and I think, almost sure that your country has information, because all the controls on the war are victims in some way of this kind of phenomena, and the pilots also. And I'm sure that in your country, a lot of controllers have been information about pilots report and reports and sightings of pilots, and definitely they have been taking information in his screens, I'm sure.
My name is Massimo Poggi. I am a captain, senior captain of Boeing 747 in Alitalia, Italy's world airline. On the 1st of July 1999, I was flying from Rome to São Paulo, Brazil, and almost at mid-Atlantic position, we had a background noise on our phone increasing, and also if the phone was already disconnected from a radio apparatus working. And it was increasing, and very, very noisy. Then in a couple of seconds, a high nose level reached. Me and my first officer put it out from our head, and in the same time we saw a halo, a green glowing light diffuse, just flying very fast below our nose, below our aircraft. And in the same time, the 747 had a sudden jump, just only one jump. And half a second later, noise and the light was disappear. And that's the only jump we had in 11 hours flight. It was very, very near. The normal background noise of a radio, and it was increasing in 5 to maximum 10 seconds, from a very low level to a high peak. And when it was at the peak, the light and the jump, but we was flying at 930 kilometers per hour, about 500 knots, nautical miles, and the crossing object was a lot of fast. I think maybe 1,000 knots or much more. My aircraft, yes, was 35,000 feet. And the object was below us, but I don't know how much. But maybe 500 or even more feet. Very near. Yes, for an aircraft flying was a near collision. Yes, I was flying over Turin, Italy, and it was 1992. Still captain, but of DC-930. And I saw, we was flying, of course, with a lot of our aircraft crossing our route normally. And my attention was picked up by a spot, an aircraft far away, that was maintaining too much the position related to the clouds on the background. Maybe was flying toward us, but after 20 years of flight experience, I don't know, I have a feeling, and that was strange. So I picked up from my bag a spotting scope, and looking at him, I saw something like an elliptical sphere with a line crossing, and there was with a bank of 45-50 degrees in respect of the horizon. And I think wasn't an aircraft turning. Also because I saw for a few seconds, maybe half a minute, and if an aircraft was turning, it was proceeding its flight path, so you can saw your belly or something like, and it was very steady. And in this half a minute, the control called my flight. So I have to send back our answer to speak with my co-pilot. And when I was looking again in this direction, nothing was here. And it was not in other position. Yes, I have searched for him everywhere. Also, in a normal flight path, if it was an aircraft, it was flying, and it was disappeared. And in the last 2 years, many times, and this is it is important, I had an answer back, a feedback from my crew, and also flight engineers, but very often the first officer that normally was in the past military pilots said that he had scrambles by UFO on the radars. He told me something he saw when he was military in an Air Force base, and he talked about one time, but he not only him, but all the pilots and also sergeant and other military personnel. So in an air base of northern Italy, and so something like a classic UFO tradition that was landing just outside the airport perimeter, and there is a wall, a big wall around the airport, and so a little human-like figure that wasn't touched on the ground, was lifted up. And when he called the alert, the other pilots to come looking at this, the little man jumped out of the wall, and the UFO lift off and disappear very, very fast. The surgeon that was looking all this section, after 20 years, is still shocked by this one. 15 minutes later, the first officer said, yeah, I was flying a military aircraft for 15 years and nothing happened, but I had 2 UFO scramble, and one time I was on ground in Camari Air Force Base, it's near Milan in Italy, and all people saw a spheric light, very, very bright, flying very low across all the base, and disappear at the horizon. And it was not an aircraft. In 1992-93, I was in a bus to reach the airport on a flight duty, and I saw over Rome, in the direction of Rome, I was in Fiumicino, something that I was judging like a blimp. The blimp is Hindenburg, I don't know if... but was too long to be a blimp. And near it, there was a sphere, very, very sharp, very sharp. And I happened to speak with the driver, because in my mind I was strange. Maybe, but no, it's impossible. And then I reached the airport and I take off for my flight. with the image in my mind of this, and the doubt that was a Goodyear blimp or something like spot publicity or something like. When 3, 4, 5 months later, I bought in a magazine, Italian magazine, that was reported some shots of a UFO over Rome. I recognized the object. I really believe the UFO are real because of everything I told before, and also because it's impossible some kind of experience or some kind of technologies without background that is extraterrestrial. Of course, yes, because if it was just terrestrial, I think it was used almost in every war, and the nation that was taking this technology taking advantage on human craziness of war. I don't also believe, but I hope it was extraterrestrial, because if not, are very dangerous in human hands.
My name is Graham Bethune. I'm a commander, retired pilot from the Navy, and I went through the regular Navy program of training pilots. I graduated in 1943 from Pensacola, the Academy of the Air, and of course all Navy pilots are trained navigators, which is very important when you're going to talk about what we're talking about, because we had to know all the star systems, and we had to know these type of things. I navigated maybe 13 years around the planet with the stars. And when I first graduated from Pensacola in 1943, I went to the South Atlantic, and we were hunting German submarines. This was all night flying. Everything we did was at night at that time, being in patrol planes. When I was transferred to Air Transport Squadron 1 in 1950, here again, we were flying, most of the Earth's surface is water, and you're flying over the ocean, so you're navigating with the stars. And I was sent to Keflavik, Iceland, along with 2 other officers, after a meeting that they'd had in Washington, D.C., where Iceland was involved in seeing things over Keflavik, Iceland, and they wanted troops up there to protect them. During our meeting, they were explaining to us why they had requested the troops and what they were seeing, and we asked them if they could really go into more detail about the type of craft that they were seeing. In their explanation, they were seeing most of them at night, lighted craft, circular, and we knew, coming from the Naval Air Test Center, we tested everything there, that we had nothing like that we tested. So I asked them, I said, what did our government tell you they were? And they said, your government said they were experimental, probably experimental Russian bombers. The flight that we had our encounter on was from Keflavik, Iceland, to Argentine, Newfoundland, and as we took off on the 9th of February, and of course we flew through midnight, which it meant is about 30 minutes after midnight. This is the position we're in here, and that's where the encounter took place. The flight was normally about 10 hours, but that night we had a 60-knot wind, and it was a headwind. And about maybe 300 to 400 miles outside of Keflavik, out of Argentia, I'm sorry, I saw something below the horizon on the water that looked like approaching a city at night. It was just kind of an ambient light, no definition whatsoever, but the same thing that you would see if you were approaching a large city at night. So I watched it for a while. It was about 1 o'clock, and then finally I called Kingdon's attention, who was sitting in the right seat, who was route checking me, and he took a look at it, and he didn't know what it was. We couldn't figure out. There was nothing out there. We had passed over the guard ship. Back in those days, they had a guard ship that was between Iceland and between Newfoundland. The guard ship had given us the latest weather. The weather was clear. There was no northern light activity, which they give as part of the weather report. And we had ship plots. There were no ships plotted in that area, so we asked Koger if he could give us another fix and find out if we were really on course. We thought maybe we had drifted. We were seeing Labrador, the coast of Labrador, or maybe the tip of Greenland. So he said, no, we were right on course. So we watched it for a while, and we were drifting to the right of it, and where our heading was 222 degrees, 225 degrees in that direction. As we became, I would say, we were at 10,000 feet. I would say it was 40 miles away originally, in the vicinity, 40 miles away. When we were about 25 or 30 miles away, we could see defined lights, and there was a pattern on the water. So with that pattern, we couldn't figure out what was going on. Maybe the Navy was doing something that was highly classified, recovering something out in the ocean or something of this nature. So that was our thoughts. And it was a circular pattern, and it was very large. I mean, I couldn't estimate the size of it. So I sent the crew chief back to get the other plane commander, Al Jones, because they wanted to land at Argentia. So when the crew was coming up from back aft, there were 31 passengers, and we had 2 VP crews, which had pilots also, and patrol plane pilots. And at the time that they came forward, the lights went out on the water. There was nothing on the water. This was about 15 miles away. I mean, it was just dark. Now, standing behind me was the navigator, the radioman, and also the plane captain, plus them. The cockpit was full, and there were heads all over the place. And all of a sudden, we saw on the water a yellow halo that was very, very small, about 15 miles away. And it came up to 10,000 feet like that, a fraction of a second. And I thought it was going to go right through us. And I disengaged the autopilot, pushed the nose over because I was going to go on it at the angle it was coming toward me. So what happened, the minute that I did that, it was up at our altitude, and I could see nothing outside of the cockpit but this craft. So I didn't know which way to go. And then all of a sudden I heard a racket. I didn't know what it was. And I said, Fred, what the hell was that? He looked around and he says, oh, he said everyone was ducking in the back of us, and they collided, and they're all laying on the deck back there, scrambling on the deck. So when I looked back, it wasn't there. And he says, it's over here on the right-hand side. Now, it was about a mile or so away on the right-hand side, and it kind of drifted forward, maybe to a position maybe 5 miles away, and that's where it stayed with us for quite some time. This is when we could first see, it wasn't above our altitude, it was below our altitude, but it was still above the horizon where you could see the side of the craft, you could see the dome, and you could see the color around the perimeter of the craft. And then we knew that it was a friendly encounter. We knew it knew we were there. We knew it came out to see us, but we didn't think at that time that the reason it did this is because they wanted to show us what the Icelanders were talking about. So we watched it for a while, and Al says, well, let him get in the seat. So I let him get in the seat, and he disengaged the autopilot, was going to chase it. Now, we had a ground speed of, his headwind of about 60 knots, so our ground speed was maybe only 120, 130 knots. And so he wasn't going to go too far in chasing this thing, but he did turn to chase it. So I decided I would go back aft to see how the passengers reacted, and also talk to the doctor that was back there. He used to make the trip over there. He had a daughter going to school in London. And so I went to him first. I said, Doc, did you see what we saw? And he says, yeah. He says, he looked me straight in the eye. He says, yeah. He says, it was a flying saucer. He says, I didn't look at it because I don't believe in such things. Well, it took me a couple of seconds to recognize it. He couldn't believe, being a psychiatrist, in that. So I went back forward and I said, Al, whatever you do, don't tell anybody we saw anything. He'll lock us up as soon as we get on the ground. He said, it's too late. He said, I just called Ganner to control to see if they could track this by radar. So that's how it got out. So when we landed at Argentia, the Air Force was there, and they interrogated us. And the captain that did the interrogation did a real good job, but you could tell that this wasn't his first time that he'd ever interrogated anybody as far as these craft were concerned. The water was yellow around. Now, since then I've learned, not long after that, I learned from, we'll say, the boys upstairs, why we saw different colors as it was coming toward us. The colors were around the perimeter. It was kind of at an angle to where you could not see the back ring of the craft, but it's around the perimeter of the craft. And it turned from a yellow to an orange to almost a fiery red, and then almost a purplish red. And they said that had to do with the amount of energy being used or dissipating. It had to do with the power, so to speak. And so when it slowed down close to us in a fraction of a second, it was back to the yellow range, and it was foggy all around it to where you like a plasma or a mist or something of this nature. Now, as far as any lights, there were no lights that we saw. This was just around the perimeter. When it was out where most of the crew members or the people in the back of the airplane saw it, it was fire and color. Every report, every one of them stated that in the report that we got out of the archives. Everyone said fire and color, ring, fire and color. We had like a knowing. When that question was asked, it was 300 feet that came in my mind. And when I got the report out of the archives in 1991, I'd never seen anybody else's report. Everyone had been anywhere from 250 to 350 feet in diameter. And when I talked to others, they said, well, just something that they knew and estimated. Now, the velocity when it left us was estimated from between 1,000 miles an hour to 2,000 miles an hour. And when I looked at the report, Al Jones estimated 1,800 miles an hour. Mine was 1,000, another one was 1,500 miles an hour, in that range. It turns out that the radar report, which I've never seen, said it was 1,800 miles an hour. So the other plane commander was sitting in the seat, took my seat. He hit it right on the nose. And of course, I was at the Naval Air Test Center. This is where we trained the astronauts, and this is where we had our test pilot training school. This is where we did all the highly classified tests of aircraft, and to my knowledge, we had nothing would do anywhere near approach to speed or anything that was circular. We were flying at 10,000 feet, and this is drawn like that you're in another aircraft flying 90 degrees to this aircraft in this direction, but you're at 5,000 feet, so we would be in this height here. We would count in seconds, would be at 1,001 would be the second one. Well, it wasn't quite a second, or maybe two at the very most. Now that was 15 miles that it covered in that short period of time. Now you could calculate how fast it came toward us, and just like you just put the brakes on in front of us. But you take something 3 feet in diameter, 300 feet in diameter, and look out, you don't see much out of your cockpit window. Then this is the light pattern that we saw. Then in this position here, there was no lights. Then this is a little yellow halo, and this is the way it came up to us. In fact, I've been corresponding with a magnetic engineer for several years. He's writing a book. He's already got pretty close to 100 pilot reports, and I gave him in detail everything that happened. I went to set the automatic pilot back, and the magnetic compass, which is in the center of the panel, was swinging back and forth. I said to Fred, I said, did you see that? He said, you should have seen it when the craft was close. He said it was spinning. And so then we looked at the others. Now, at that time, the craft was sitting out maybe 5 miles from us. We had what we call bird dogs. They're low-frequency radio pointers that will point to the station when you tune in the station. These two bird dogs were pointing towards the craft just like this. We had two other compasses. We had a remote compass, which is out in a wing, which doesn't anything affect it, but it was reacting. Now, what I set the instruments back on was that we had a vacuum-operated directional gyro, and in the autopilot we had a hydraulically operated gyro, so none of these were affected. So I was able to set our course back using those. But those were the things that we noticed, that there was a total of 5 different directional gyros in that airplane. And out of the 5, 3 of them were acting up. It was tracked by radar. That same trip, flying the troops up, I said, Fred, did you know that it was tracked by? Oh, he said, yeah, I knew that 2 weeks after it happened. I said, well, why didn't you tell me? I said, the report go in? He said, as far as he knows, he said, the one that he talked to said it was sent in to the Air Force headquarters in Washington, D.C. It usually goes from there to Wright-Patterson is where it was sent. So, but when we got, now my boss, that's another thing. When he found the report in the archives in Wright-Patterson on Project Blue Book, and talking to Colonel Watson, when he came back to me, he gave me the speed of 1,800 miles. I said, where did you find that out? And he said, well, it was a radar report that said that. So something happened to the radar report before the microfilm, because what I have on microfilm, I got from the archives. I was told by a friend of mine there that I'd known for years that they had allowed Steven Spielberg to microfilm this, the Blue Book records for whatever, Close Encounter of the Third Kind or something of this nature. So he had a pretty high clearance. He had to be self-associated with some of the, well, you know who, as far as the majority agency is concerned. The other plane commander I located, many years ago when he was with this company that he wouldn't talk. After he retired, I got a hold of him again in 1996, and I flew out to where he lived. I said, what we'll do is we'll just take a tape recorder and we'll both discuss it. And I says, and later on I'll have somebody else interview you so they don't have to believe it. So that's what happened. In the report that I wrote, his statement is in there, several pages of his statement. His schematic of what he saw is in there. And it was amazing how they matched. This is what they saw. They saw it under the wing, see, right here. So we figured it was in this position here at the time that they saw it. The document that I found was the official document that the Air Force had put together, different sources that came to them. And it was originally filed, it was under Project Grudge. You can see in their written Project Grudge. But on the front page it says Project Twinkle. Now this is where they put a lot of ones that they had to get rid of somehow. It was Project Twinkle. So it was in Project Blue Book and Project Grudge and what other project I don't know that was in. It was 18 pages according to the archives, but they only found 17 on a film. So the other could have been a radar report, it could have been anything. And I was flying at that time Admiral McCormick, who had relieved Eisenhower. Admiral McCormick was the NATO commander, the Supreme Allied commander. Now his aides had approached me. Everybody seemed to know about it because it wasn't that highly classified. Like Admiral Radford, who became the first Joint Chiefs of Staff, his aides knew about it because they had talked to me about it. So there's quite a few that knew about this. So this is where I learned a lot that really was not official, and it was really not in any books. This, of course, is the flight over Washington, D.C., if you remember, 1952, July the 20th. And of course, this was after our encounter. And what this did, it helped us prove our sanity to our friends, because if they didn't believe what we saw, all they had to do was observe, visit. When we came back after taking the troops up, when we came back, this was in May, I had an intelligence officer come through the house, and he didn't seem like that he was that much interested in the reports that he was working on there with me. And he showed me pictures, the first pictures I'd ever seen of him. There was nothing, absolutely nothing there that even looked close to it. It was one he claimed was 100 feet in diameter, pretty close to 100 feet in diameter. Didn't look like it was damaged too much. And so he's the one I asked a lot of questions. I says, what happens to this report? He told me exactly what happened. He says, there is a committee. Now, this is his words. There is a Joint Intelligence Committee. Of course, you have to realize the Air Force was 447. It was only natural. Each one had a intelligence committee, and so they had a Joint Intelligence Committee. And he said, and they make the decision as to where it goes to, because they were coming to me a lot of times and showing me photographs. A lot of them looked like what we call Foo Fighters. A lot of them looked like just a round, bright disc of some kind. Now I've got. There was Secretary of Navy Kimball. I was what you call a VIP plane commander in the Flag Division. which flew most of the high-ranking officers and civilians out of Washington, D.C. And we had several of those. Now, they told me what they saw. There were two craft flying together out in the Pacific. And it was just a bright disk that came up beside one of them and stayed with them for a while and flew around it. And they couldn't estimate the size of it at 50 to 100 feet in diameter. Our office came under the headquarters at Wright-Patterson, where it was a central district. That means all of the Bureau of Aeronautics reps in the central district. That would be the test pilots, any of the officers in these plants that were test pilots, accepting airplanes, this type of thing. So you had engineering meetings, you had pilot meetings, you had all these type of meetings, and I would go down there about once or twice a month in the meetings. Plus, I would go maybe 2 or 3 times a year for seminars. We'd have it be a week. So, on the flight line where we parked our plane most of the time, we weren't too far from looked like a hangar, looked like a corrugated metal hangar, and it was open most of the time. Every time my boss and I'd go by there, he couldn't understand why I was not interested in going and looking at what was behind the metal wall back there. And he told me basically that they had a craft back there, and he told me basically that they did have bodies there. Now, he's not the first one that ever told me that. After he found our report in Project Blue Book down there, then he became interested himself, because the discussions he'd had with Admiral Forney, because Admiral Forney was our missile chief, and he'd spent time at White Sands, that Admiral Forney was convinced that craft from other planets were visiting us. And after this is when he became aware, and he did, the officer that he was talking to was Colonel Watson, because he kept bringing up Colonel Watson's name. So he was allowed, Colonel Watson let him look at a lot of these files, plus he was the one that told him about what they had there. He saw what they had there. And as I said, he couldn't understand why I was not. I said, well, really, I don't have any interest. I said, I'll never be able to talk about it. And I know enough now from what I've seen that I know they exist. But I really had no interest in seeing it. And 2 or 3 times he'd asked me the same thing.
And you haven't yet said what it was that you didn't look at. I mean, you haven't.
It was a craft. It was a craft that had crashed somewhere. Extraterrestrial craft, exactly. A lot of them had, I had a top secret clearance, but here we get back to the need to know, and I'm sure that in a lot of cases that the other people had the need to know about certain things that I didn't have, and you have to realize this is where the Army and I guess eventually the Air Force too, but the Army and Navy had their aeronautical engineers there. Basically, they had a lot of training that they went through there, and so I'm sure if we had anything from another planet, that some of these engineers would be involved, whether they were magnetic engineers or aeronautical engineers or whatever they were, they'd be involved in looking. And of course, I'm sure a lot of them would be civilian too. There's just so many things that I can, being in the military, what do you think the generals and admirals would think when they hear there's something out there, a couple of these little craft could destroy all of their forces? And one thing, naturally, that their jobs too. Well, I'm sure that, as we all know, that Muroc, which is Edwards Air Force Base, I'm sure that there are a lot of places that have underground facilities. I can state one, Inuit-Kern. I think that's China Lake or close to it. That was the name of the airport. I delivered a transport there at one time, and of course they wouldn't let me go anywhere. The duty officer would go to lunch with me and what have you. And he told me some things about some things. He says, once you come here, you don't leave. And I knew that they had what he indicated. He didn't tell me outright what was there, but there was no question in my mind that there was a lot of the top secret work done there and a lot of things that we don't know about it. I do know that we did bring some of the craft back from Germany after World War II. Because in a plant that we had there in Detroit, we gave the Army some space for the Redstone Jupiter missile. And they had some V-2 rockets there that we brought back. And talking to a lot of these engineers, Werner von Braun, his brother, I'm sure that some of the technology that they brought back from Germany, it's probably been done all over the place. In fact, Corso's book, I was involved in some things that I'm suspicious that were of the same nature, where they were asking us to see if we could find a contractor in the area that could build something like this, or back engineer or something like it. And then we never thought about it when they said, well, that it wasn't our technology. We were, well, so what? You know, the Germans had a much higher technology than we did. My son was about 8 years old, and we were sodding the backyard, and I went into the house to wash up, and he came into the house and says, "Dad, Mommy wants you outside." I says, "What for?" He says, "We're looking at flying saucers." Well, I thought to myself, what the heck does he know about flying saucers? So I go outside, and here she is standing and pointing to something up above us. And you know what it was? It was a small mothership about the size of the Dembski ship, and there were small craft all around. So I go back in the house and get the binoculars because I want to get a good look at this. So I come back, and the ship itself had gone, but I got a chance to see 2 or 3 of the small ones, and they were identical with the little 3 balls underneath, condensers, what have you, to the Georgia Dempsey craft. So, you know, when we got back in the house, I asked my wife, I said, how did you find out about flying saucers? Because we were not supposed to tell her, even our wives, in our encounter, which was in '51. She said, now she was explaining to him how they launch them and retrieve them. And the bottom and the top, she was explaining this process. And she said, I read your book by Georgia Dembski, Inside Spaceships. I said, you bought that book. I said, do you believe that he was telling the truth? They told me he was crazy. And she says, well, didn't you? You just saw it out there. So now what do you do? Well, I'm convinced that what I saw was, to my knowledge, we wouldn't have had anything that size. And I'm certain that it was from another planet, not from this planet. I mean, it's nothing, our technology was not such at that time that we could have any kind of a craft like that. I'm sure of that.
The leader line, they call it, that points toward the target itself. This is what is altitude, and the altitude's normally written down in hundreds. And see that little, the little dot right there? That dot don't belong there. That's the unknown, is that dot that's in front of that slash. He doesn't belong there. I'm one of those, what you would call the high government official in the FAA. I was the division chief. There was only 3 or 4 down from the admiral. I became the branch chief for the quality control. The quality control branch later on became a division, and I became a division chief, and they called it the Accidents Investigations Branch in Washington, D.C. We investigated all the airline incidences, all the accidents. I stayed there for about 6 years and then retired. The way it started is there was a 747, a Japanese airline, 747, was coming from the northwest going across the Alaskan territory. And he was at either 31, 33, or 35,000 feet. And it was, I want to say around 11 o'clock at night, but you can check the real times. He called and asked the controller if the controller had any traffic at his altitude. And the controller said no. Basically, it was a midnight operation. They didn't have too much traffic. And he said, well, something like, I have a target at my 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock position, about 8 miles. Now, in the 747, they have radar in the nose that picks up the weather outside there. So his radar is picking up a target. He sees this target with his eye, and the target, the way he described it, was a huge ball with lights running around it, and I think he said it was like 4 times as big as a 747. Well, on the day I'm doing PERs, I got behind, and I told the secretary not to bother me, I'm doing PERs. And a few minutes later, the phone's ringing, and then she wouldn't stop calling. So I asked what was going on. She said, you got to talk to the people in Alaska. So I said, all right. So I forgot who it was that called, but he says, we got a problem here. I don't know what to tell the media. The whole office is full of the media from Alaska. What's the problem? He says, well, it's that UFO. I said, what UFO? He says, well, we last week we had a UFO chase, a 747 across the skies up here for about 30 minutes or so, and we didn't think too much of it. He says, but apparently the word got out, and we have all these news people here, and we want to know what to tell them. So being an old government employee, I told him what you always tell them, is tell them it's under investigation, and then get all that data together. I wanted all the discs that they had and all the tapes that they had available, and flown overnight to the tech center at Atlantic City. But they called the military, and they told the military they wanted all their tapes. We also control, the FAA controls all the airspace above the United States and its territory. It doesn't belong to the military, it doesn't belong to the guys shooting the rockets off. It belongs to the United States government, and it's controlled by the FAA. Nobody moves in this airspace unless we give the approval. So I told them to get the military's tapes and all their data and ship that down. Well, they called back an hour or so later, and they said the military said they were short on the tapes, and they had to put them back in service, and it's only been 12 days. So the administrator sent, my boss was the associate director, Javi Safir. Sounds like safer, but it's Safir. Sent him and me to Atlantic City to look at this thing to see if he had something to worry about. So we went in and told him that we wanted this room set up to be just like it was in Anchorage, and we wanted all that data to come to this scope, and we wanted to see everything to control the scene. We wanted to hear everything he heard, and we wanted it all tied together, the radar, the digital radar, and the sound. Found out later that some of the people that were working on that side of the fence that were displaying this had already reviewed the tapes and didn't feel comfortable in showing us what was on there. But they ran it through. When the air traffic controller had asked the military man, do you see anything? The military guy says, yes, I have a target at such and such, 1 o'clock and 8 miles from the Japanese pilot, 747. The military man said something like, yeah, I see him 35 miles north of Anchorage, and who's that at 11 or 1 o'clock in his position? And the FAA controller said, I don't have anybody. Do you have anybody? He said, it's not mine. And he came back and said, we have no traffic here. And a couple times during the operation, the Japanese pilot would say he's now at 11 o'clock, he's now at 1 o'clock, he's now at 3 o'clock. He was bouncing around, this guy here. And when he would say that, the military guy would cut in and say he's now at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, and he would confirm the position. The military controller has what they call height-finding radar, and they have long-range radar and short-range radar. So if they don't catch it on one of their systems, they catch it on the other. And if you listen to the military man, at one time he said, I have it on the height radar, or my range radar, whatever he called it, which indicated that he had a target on his system. Oz wouldn't record it. Well, they ran through for the best part of 31 minutes. The UFO would be in one position or the other, following our Japanese 747. After a while, they changed his altitude. It still stayed with him. They gave him a 360. When you're a 747, you make a 360, it takes you a few minutes to turn around, you cover a lot of space. It still stayed with him. It was either in the front, on the side, or behind him. 10, I approve 1628 to make deviations as necessary for traffic. The traffic stayed with 1628 through turns and descents in the vicinity of Fairbanks. I requested 1628 make a right 360. They would see that the target be at 1 o'clock and 7 or 8 miles, and then next it would be on the next sweep, which would be like 10 seconds later, it would be behind him 7 or 8 miles, and it always stayed 7 or 8 miles away from the target when it was all done. And we went back to Washington the next day. The administrator had called down and wanted to know if he had a problem or not. And my boss had told him, well, we took a video of it, and it looks like there might have been something there. Well, his thing was, can you come up and give us a quick 5-minute rundown? What happened? So we go up to the 10th floor, and in the conversation of a 4 or 5 minute debriefing, the administrator, which was Ingen at the time, Admiral Ingen, he said, well, have you got that video with you? Can you show me the video? And I said, yeah, and you just plug it in and play it. So we plugged it in for him. He started watching it, and after about 5 minutes, he told the staff, I cancel my, he had a meeting with someone in 15 minutes. He says, first he said, I'll be late, and then next it was cancel, and then I'm going to be here till this is over. So he watched the whole thing just over half an hour. When he got all,
This was the administrator of FAA?
The administrator of the FAA. We got all done. He says, what do you guys think? Well, I guess that's why he was the service director and I wasn't. He gave a good political answer that said he wasn't sure what it was. Didn't know if it was anything. So his take was, don't talk to anybody. Don't talk to anybody until I give you the okay. The next day, I got a call from someone with the scientific study group or the CIA, I'm not sure who it was the first time. And they wanted to know, they had some questions about the incident. And I had said, I don't know what you're talking about, you probably want to call the Admiral. A few minutes later, the Admiral calls down and says, I set up a briefing tomorrow morning at 9 or 10 o'clock, what it was. In the round room, bring all the stuff you have, bring everybody up there, and give them whatever they want. And we want to get out of it, just let them do whatever they want to do with it. So I brought all the people from the tech center. We went upstairs, we had all kinds of boxes of data that we had them print out, filled up the room. They brought in 3 people from the FBI, 3 people from the CIA, and 3 people from Reagan's scientific study team, and I don't know who the rest of the people were. But they were all excited. We gave them the video, let them watch the video, and I had they had all kinds of questions about the frequencies, the rate of the antenna turning, on and on and on. How many radars? How many antennas? How's the data get processed? They were all excited. The only way a man would be if that was his job. When they got done, they actually swore all these other guys into that this never took place. We never had this meeting, and this was never recorded. Now, what I tried to tell you before...
Who said that? Who was saying
this? This was one of the guys from the CIA, okay? That they were never there, this never happened. When I asked them at the time, I said, well, I don't know why you're saying this. I mean, it's there was something there, and if it's not the stealth bomber, then, you know, it's a UFO. And if it's a UFO, why wouldn't you want the people to know? Oh, they get all excited over that. You don't even want to say those words. He said this is the first time they ever had 30 minutes of radar data on a UFO, and they're all itching to get their hands into the data and to find out what it is and what really goes. And if they come out and told the American public that they ran into a UFO out there, it would cause panic across the country, so therefore you can't talk about it. And they're taking all this data. So I said, okay, take all that data. That's what you want.
Who took the data?
Well, that group. I don't know who it went to, but that group took it. But they took only what we had there. They didn't ask me if there was anything else that I had. They said they're taking all this data. And I said, fine. Now, I had the original video that I took, and I had the pilot's report that came through, the first report, and I had the FAA's first report that was all downstairs on my table. They didn't ask for that, so I didn't give it to them. And later on, when I retired, that was the stuff that was in my office, and all that came with me, and we've been sitting on that ever since. So we watched the whole thing. Now, what happened at the end is the Japanese 747 is leaving the airspace. There's a United coming up to land in Alaska. The controller says to United, we've got a Japanese 747 up here that is being chased, followed by a UFO. We'd like you to check him out. Can we leave you at the altitude? And the United says, fine, or sure. And so they give him a left turn, 20 degrees or so, keep him at his altitude, and they kind of run him in toward the Japanese 747. Once the 2 airplanes pass, that target follows the United down through the airspace until he gets on final and then disappears. When they read the reports that come through, the FAA has to protect themselves, so you can't say you saw a target, even though this is what he said. So they made him change his report to position symbols, which makes it sound like it wasn't really a target. Well, if that's not a target, then a lot of the other position symbols that we're separating from aren't targets either. And when I read that, I thought, there's something fishy here, that somebody's worried about something rather than they're trying to cover up. When the CIA told us that this never happened and we never had this meeting, I believe it was because they didn't want the public to know that this was going on. Normally we would put out some type of a news release that such and such happened. That I think it was mysterious that the military tapes disappeared. It wasn't right. We went from 30 days to 15 days, and the first indication makes it look like it must have been a military operation that they were doing up there, or the military knew more than we did about who the visitors were, and they didn't want anybody else to know. And of course, the people that are involved at the lower levels don't really know what's going on above them. When someone calls up and says, put those tapes back in service, they just put them back in service. They really don't care. When they asked me what I thought, I told them that it looked like we had a UFO that was up there. The reason it wasn't on the FAA's tapes was because it was too large of an aircraft, and it was picked up as weather, so we wouldn't record it. That the pilot, the Japanese pilot, seen it. The Japanese pilot drew pictures of it. Eventually, they gave the Japanese pilot a hard time because of what he said. He was embarrassing his country. Our military controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers said they seen it. Our FAA controllers, after a period of time, came back and said they really didn't see a target. They saw something else, which makes it sound like somebody is helping them fill out their reports, and therefore that looks suspicious.
During the period of 2030, I was on duty and I was working the D-50. I'm making this statement to clarify certain points in my original statement on November the 19th. This was January the 6th.
My guess is, because of the way it was, it's not part of the military's operation anymore, that it was a UFO. But who do you tell that you were involved in a UFO incident without them looking at you like you ain't wrapped too tight? And this is, I think, is the way our country is set up now. If someone comes out and says, I saw a UFO on TV, the only ones that see a UFO in the TV programs are the rednecks out in the country that are going coon hunting or alligator hunting at night. You don't find anybody with any kind of smarts or some professional individual saying, hey, last night, let me tell you what I saw. They don't display that in the United States. So if you talk about seeing a UFO, you're putting yourself in a funny kind of a category. That's probably one reason why you don't hear about it anymore. As far as I'm concerned, I saw a UFO chase a Japanese 747 across the sky for over half an hour on radar.
And see, all these little hits are something that they have to explain all the time.
If you can go within it was a 10-second radar, so at 1 o'clock and 7 miles, you see them, and then 10 seconds later, or even not even 10 seconds later, it's less than 10 seconds, because when the system got southwest of the sweep got southwest of the Japanese 747, it picked them up again, so it would go from 1 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles to 6, 7 o'clock, 7 or 8 miles inside of 4 or 5 seconds. You have to be moving pretty quickly, and it's faster than anything that I know of in our government.
It's 2:30, 6:50 something.
Okay, we're right on time. Close enough, I think.
I've been involved in a lot of cover-ups with the FAA. When we gave the presentation to the Reagan staff, I was behind the group that was there, and when they were speaking to the people in the room, they had all those people swear that this never happened. They never had me swear it never happened. It always bothered me that we have these things going on, and when you see something or you hear something on the radio or TV, the news, that it's put down as it's not there. I have a hard time saying nothing because it's not there. When I first told those that I knew about this, it just died. I mean, nothing ever happens. So you look at it kind of funny, like, and it still bothers me that I've seen all this, I know all this, and like I'm walking around like with the answer, and nobody wants to ask the question to get the answer, and it kind of irritates me a little bit. And I don't believe our government should be set up that way. I think when we have something like this, that you could probably find out more about what's going on in the world. If they can travel that far, that distance, with that type of machinery, who knows what they could do here for the health of the nation, of the people, the food they could give them, the cancers we could cure. They have to know more than us to be able to travel in that speed. I sure would like to know what's going on. And that's one reason why I'm not afraid to talk about what's happening. What I can tell you is what I've seen with my own eyes, and I said, I've got a videotape, I've got I got the voice tape, I've got the reports that were filed that will confirm what I've been telling you. Those people that say that if these UFOs existed, then someday would be on radar and that to be professionals would see it, then I can tell them that back in 1986 there were enough professional people that saw it. It was brought down to headquarters, FAA headquarters, Washington, D.C. The administrators seen the tape of it. The people that we were debriefing, they've all seen. Reagan Scientific Study Team, the three of those professors, doctors, they've seen it. As far as I was concerned, they were the ones that verified my own thoughts about it. They were very, very excited about the data. They had said at that time this was the only time, and they had used the words, a UFO was ever recorded on radar for any length of time where it's 30-some minutes, and they have all this data to look at. Now, a 30-minute radar return filled up boxes across the thing, and the boxes were stacked, 2 or 3 high. There was a lot of paper data to look at. They knew the frequency now of the radar. They knew how fast it turned. They knew where it was. They had the military that confirmed it. And when I gave them my card, the CIA guy said, we're with the company. They don't say CIA. And the company, we don't have cards. We don't have company cards. They may have a card, but it's nothing to do with the company. And he said that there's nothing we can give out. I'm sure on the Admiral's calendar, they have who reserved that, or they should have, who reserved the room and who was there for the day of the briefing. Even the Admiral had to talk about it wherever he went because he canceled too many meetings to watch this thing here. And it was late at night when we got back. We got back at either 4:30, 4:45. And he canceled his meetings, and to me that meant that he thought it was something to say. We had a government investigator come by checking just a few weeks ago, checking on an individual that we know for his security clearance with the CIA, and she's with the CIA checking on him to make sure he's an okay guy. And during this period of time, I had said, well, I've been involved with the CIA one other time, and oh, what was that? So when I started giving her this UFO thing, you could see her look, like she's in the room with 2 kooks, and like, can I get out of here safe? It's the only thing you could see on her face. And it was panic, and I'm thinking, that's the way the world's, but I think that's the way the government wants the outside people to view those that have seen something like this, like they are kooks, they're not wrapped too tight, and you got to watch out for them. That's the image that they put out. I guess I really don't care about the image, but I do feel like they had something and that we've seen it.